open it up and then
It don't matter. Oh.
I got a fear losing people that I love. All we do is party and turn up at the club. I got a fear it's not gonna happen, it's a dub. I got a fear they popping pills, doing drugs. Dear mama, sorry, never meant to hurt you. Stayed out for weeks, even though I had a curfew. Smoked so much haze, face started looking purple. 360 deals, got them moving in a circle. White man created these laws, so I'ma break it. I got a fear that some of our people, they ain't gonna make it. Your mind really gotta be strong for you to take it. I guess I'm really starting to lose all of my patience. Well, put yourself in my situation. ADOS, we demanding no reparations. They get people sick and make money your medication. Sell dreams to the youth and they lie about education. I got a fear we gon' lose them to the grind. I got a fear they gon' start doing crime. The judge don't got a problem giving blacks all the time. We grew up with nothing, so they plotting on your shine. I got a fear youngin' gon' pull a steal. I got a fear they gon' hate me for being real. I got a fear he gon' snitch and take a deal. Out here hungry, so they rob and they steal. I got a fear that I can't pay my bills. I got a fear that things I talk about, they get me killed. I got a fear that they sniffing and they popping pills. Change gon' come, but trust me, it never will. I got a fear losing Ike and brother Nick. My mouth gon' get me in trouble for always talking slick. When you in them streets, it's hard to go legit. When you getting fast money, it's hard for you to quit. I got a fear I brainstorm like a twister. I got a fear losing both of my younger sisters. I got a fear getting old and they calling me Mr. Hennessy straight, but I'm good with this brown liquor. I got a fear shorty like to play games. I got a fear shorty dealt with some lames. She keep herself guarded cause she think we all the same. I could treat her good, but all she seeing is the pain. I got a fear losing my little nieces. I got a fear paying too much for them sneakers. Junior high school, me and shorty behind the bleachers. Walked out the class, middle finger to the teacher. Bronx down, always repping the block now. I got a fear really letting my pops down. I got a fear you gon' get robbed with your top down. Lockdown, everybody scream at the cops now. I got a fear that everybody is a hater. I got a fear I'm here to do something greater. I'm at the diner probably flirting with the waiter. Gave me the number and told me to holler later. I got a fear really having some regret. I got a fear they gon' see me as a threat. I got a fear stopping everybody's check. When I started rapping, it was all about respect.
Peace, family, peace. Can y'all hear me?
yeah.
Okay. I can't hear y'all. Can y'all hear me? Okay, okay. All right, what we gonna do tonight, family? I'm having issues with my microphone, so we gonna try to launch this thing from my telephone and see how this thing works out. But we want to get into tonight's discussion by dealing with a topic that we have broached on Be the Power already, and that is the topic of citizenship. I think that it was important for us to come back to this particular topic because, you know, we did that broadcast earlier on when we started BTP, and we wanted to bring some things back to the forefront. So what I want to do right now is want to read something from the Black's Law Dictionary, and I want to read the definition of nationality. And please, everyone, hit the like button, hit the share button. If you want to donate, You could cash at Be the Power. I'm going to have a Patreon set up by the next broadcast that we do. Share this with your family and your friends. We teaching tonight in our discussion, in our discourse. So I wanted to read from Black's Law Dictionary the definition of nationality. It says that quality or character which arises from the fact of a person's belonging to a nation or state. Nationality determines the political status of the individual, especially with reference to allegiance, while domicile determines his civil status. Nationality arises either by birth or by naturalization. Now, anybody have watched our first broadcast? If you follow any of the teachings that I put up on this channel back in the days when I was a part of the Moorish Science Temple of America, you'll know that this is a tough subject that we had touched on. So what I want to do is I want to lay the groundwork for tonight's discussion by coming out of the book, The Invention of the White Race. And I'm going to open it up to my brothers. My brother Logic, my brother Ali has been going over this particular topic. And I want to give a shout out to my team, of course. Shout out brother Josh in the building. Let's start from the book, The Invention of the White Race. I don't know if y'all going to be able to see that. I should have saved it in the. Actually, I did, but I'll just leave it there. I'll leave it there. So this is what we're going to do. I didn't take none of the page numbers because I decided I was going to start off differently than I started off on the last broadcast when we broached this particular topic. So I want to read from this book, The Invention of the White Race by Theodore W. Allen. Forgive me, I don't have the page numbers up. I took it straight off the Kindle through screenshot. It says, the 1660 law equalized at 5 years the length of the custom of the country without distinction of aliens. But that same law, for the first time, restricted term limiting to those of what Christian nation soever. The Anglican Church having been established in Ireland, Ireland now qualified as a quote-unquote Christian country. Since the only Christian nations were in Europe, this clause was most particularly, though not exclusively, aimed at persons of African origin or descent. This exclusion of African Americans from the limitation on the length of servitude imposed on bond laborers reflected and was intended to further the efforts made by some elements of the plantation bourgeoisie to reduce African American bond laborers to lifetime servitude. He goes on, under English common law, Christians could not be enslaved by Christians. Presumably Scots and Dutchmen were Christians, but Africans were not. The court, by citing John Punch's quote-unquote being a Negro in justification of his life sentence, was resorting to mere bench law, devoid of reference to English or Virginia precedent. What the record of this case does show, so far as the ideas in people's heads are concerned, is a disposition on the part of some, at least, of the plantation bourgeoisie to reduce African Americans to lifetime servitude. Interject here real quick. Anybody know the story of John Punch? He and two other notably European white bond servants had escaped from their labor masters, if you will, because they were enslaved, they were servants. And all three of them got caught. But it was John Punch who was sentenced to lifetime servitude. We've seen that play out in the United States of America for decades. it's noted in the Malcolm X movie where he and the white girls, they get arrested, they get a little slap on the wrist. Malcolm and
Right.
his brother, I think his name was Shorty, got 10 years or something like that. Right. So this has been going on for a long, long time. And this is a part of the reason why I wanted to open up with this particular book. And I'm jumping from different pages. These pages are not in sequence. These are highlighted pages that I wanted to read as I frame tonight's show and we go into the discussion. It says, the contrast in the ratios of landholding between African Americans and European Americans in Northampton County in 1666, and then Virginia as a whole in 1860, documents the difference between social class differentiation and a system of racial oppression. In Northampton County in 1666, 10.9% of the African American and 17.6% of European Americans were landholders. This disparity is no more than normal, considering that 53.4% of European American landholders, I'm kind of messed up on my landholding. All right, I messed up on one of my slides that I didn't add. So I'm just going to jump to the next. But what he's showing is the disparity between what happened in 1666 and 1860. So we own considerable amounts of land in 1666, 10.9% compared to the Europeans who owned 17.6%. They were a larger population as they are now, so that makes sense. But he was showing that number greatly reduces. So I'm gonna get into some of that. He says 30,000 African American farms by some 5,400 families would have required a considerable degree of employment of European American tenants and wage laborers. That would have been incompatible with the anomalies of social class relationships characteristic of a system of social control based on racial oppression. So he gets into this table and he's giving a comparison. And I don't know how well y'all can see that, but he's showing African-American rural population, 10.93% in 1666. And this is the landholders as percentage of, I should say. But by 1860, it's only 0.34%. European American rural population tenants not included. So that theirs reduced as well, but it goes from 17.55% to 9.53%. And eventually we know that they become the largest landholders in the world. So I want to read this final excerpt. It says, but the fact that the proportion of the African American landholding population is 95% less in 1860 than it was in 1666 was the result not of normal capitalist economic development, but of racial oppression. Let it be noted in passing that the proportion of European Americans owning land in Virginia in 1860 was less than the proportion of African American landowners in 1666. If the proportion of land holding among African Americans had declined, but only as much as the ratio of land holding among European Americans, and indicated 30,000 land holdings would have been in the hands of 53,000 free rural Virginia African Americans in 1860. That would have represented an African American landholding ratio nearly 6 times the actual ratio of European American landholdings in that same year. Now, the reason I wanted to start with that particular, those particular excerpts is I wanted to show that the United States of America becomes a country in 1776. Practices that had started long before this country became a nation became ingrained within this nation's national ideology when it came to our people. And my brothers are going to get into some of that tonight. I want to give a shout out to the brother Trey Pound, who was the video that we opened up with. I wanted to play that because the brother shouting out, you know, ADOS. And I think that as artists, we need more of our rappers to understand that there's a movement out there pushing for reparations for the American descendants of slavery. So I wanted to play that for the people. So I'm going to open it up to my bros. I don't know who's going to come in first. I think Ali or Logic, and then we'll let the conversation flow naturally.
Did you want to jump in, Logic, or you want me to just go?
So before you go, I just want to say, right, understand that what we're doing tonight is establishing a certain precedent, right? A lot of people think that, you know, the narrative that somebody got to mute. A lot of people think that the narrative that we were property and that our citizenship in this country started in 1865 or 1866 with subsequent legislation that was passed. We're gonna go into some history tonight and show you how we've always been citizens and how we are, and how the American descendants of slavery are actually native Black Americans. We're native to this country. We're a part of the founding fathers and the founding element to America. And what we really have in this country is a situation where a certain group of Americans enslaved other Americans, or they transferred an illegal institution into the American way of life. So we're going to flesh out that history tonight and show you how the plight for reparations is rooted into an unconstitutional institution that was sanctioned by local, state, and federal government. The federal government didn't sanction it through way of policy and law, but they turned a blind eye to it. Slavery was unconstitutional. And we need to understand that that's a part of the justice claim, that slavery was unconstitutional. And we're going to prove how it was. There was nothing in the Constitution that expressed any legal framework to hold men as property, right? And specifically Black, not in the federal Constitution, right? And we're going to go through the timeline, walk with us on this thing. We're going to establish how we've been citizens and participating in every facet of government, from fighting in wars to sitting on juries to going to court to owning businesses, doing everything every other citizen did from the formation of the Republic in 1776 and into present day. We were not existing in some type of political limbo or national limbo until 1866 or the passing of the 14th Amendment. We were exercising citizenship, and we was recognized in many different parts of the country as citizens. You understand? We're foundational to this country. We're native to this country. We are the founding fathers. Also, see, when you hear the talk about the founding fathers, you don't think about your family, but your family are a part of the founding element that created and established the Republic. So I'm gonna go ahead and swing it to Ali. I'm gonna come behind you, bro, and you go ahead and break it down for him.
No doubt. I would just second what you're saying and just make sure that people understand that what we're talking about is based upon the fact that we consider ourselves to be reparationists, right? So everything is going to be based on the idea of creating a solid argument and just adding on. The argument is already there, but just adding on to it and helping to substantiate it with further information as to why reparations is a just will be just in terms of the United States doing what they're supposed to do on behalf of this particular portion of the citizenry. So I'm going to start with the Declaration of Independence, right? Because I think it's important in terms of framing where we're coming from with this. We're going to start with the Declaration of Independence, and then we're going to move back. Now, this is a portion of the Declaration of Independence that many of us know, probably from the popularity of even the Dr. King speech, if you don't know it from school. But this is something that Dr. King pointed out, and with good reason, you know, because obviously he's seeing it the way that we're seeing it on a certain level, right? So he understood something. This is why he was pointing it out. He says, the Declaration of Independence says in this particular section, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. If you don't know what unalienable means, look it up. Unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That I'm going to pause there, but that's very important. Governments are instituted among men to secure these rights. These are God-given, according to them, God-given, unalienable rights, those being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is very important. So let's go now. I'm going to share something. From this. It's a book called The Unconstitutionality of Slavery. We're going to go from chapter 3, dealing with the colonial charters, right? We're going to go back a little bit. Let me just share this screen, bro. We're going to go back a little bit into the colonial period and understand, ADOS family, we know that our justice claim starts from 1776. We understand that. But we're trying to deal with a timeline of events leading even up to 1776. Let me know if you guys can see it. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Now I think that's not the right one. 1 second. 1 second. Again, this is a book called, I hit the wrong tab by accident. Book called The Unconstitutionality of Slavery, right? By a man named Lysander Spooner. This is chapter 3, dealing with the colonial charters. Now he's saying something some very important things here, right? And I'm going to say this just for the other side of it, for people who may do some research into this. There were people who differed in opinion than Lysander Spooner in terms of what he was saying. But I'm just going to read this because what he was saying to me is very sound in his reasoning. Colonial charter. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, real quick, Ali, can I ask you something real quick before you get into this?
Yes, sir.
I don't think everybody understands that this is as far as us being citizens, as far as us not being citizens in this time period and through American history, all the way through slavery, that's something that a lot of scholars agree with. Like they don't believe we were citizens. And so you bringing this up is actually countering or it's bringing information that really disproves what a lot of mainstream scholars and college professors and prominent people, Black historians and talking heads are out here saying. Like a lot of y'all don't understand this. College professors from Howard University, from all these other places, that Ali really has been destroying with this information, or really befuddling them. with this information. So I just wanted to give that background. So when you're trying to figure out like, well, what is the relevance of this or whatever, or this is kind of a big deal as far as a historical argument that a lot of people haven't seen thus far.
Right. And not only is it an issue of people don't agree that blacks were citizens. Some people know, right? Some people don't, right? Some people know that free blacks may have been considered citizens in certain colonies in certain states. But a lot of people don't believe that at all, right? They don't know it. And so that's what we're really trying to establish here, is that not only that, but we're going to get into the 3/5 compromise as well, in terms of the misunderstanding of it and how it's been perpetuated over the years by so many even educated people in academia who will tell you that it was meant to imply that black people were counted as 3/5 of a human being. And that's not at all what that was saying. And so we're going to get into that a little bit later. So let me just read chapter 3, which says the colonial charters, right? This is what it says. When our ancestors came to this country, they brought with them the common law of England, including the writ of habeas corpus. This is important. When you do the history of habeas corpus, you're going to see why he's mentioning this. The essential principle of which, as will hereafter be shown, is to deny the right of property in man, the trial by jury, and other great principles of liberty which prevail in England, and which have made it impossible that her soil should be trod by the foot of a slave. These principles were incorporated into all the charters granted to the colonies. If all those charters were like those I have examined, and I have examined nearly all of them, the general provisions of those charters, as will be seen from the extracts given in the note, were that the laws of the colonies should, quote, not be repugnant or contrary, but as nearly as circumstances would allow, conformable to the laws, statutes, and rights of our kingdom of England. This is important too, because that's going to point back to the case of Somerset versus Stuart. But let's keep going. Those charters were the fundamental constitutions of the colonies, with some immaterial exceptions up to the time of the Revolution, as much so as our national and state constitutions are now the fundamental laws of our government. The authority of these charters during their continuance and the general authority of the common law prior to the Revolution have been recognized by the Supreme Court of the United States. No one of all these charters that I have examined, and I have examined nearly all of them, contain the least intimation that slavery had or could have any legal existence under them. Slavery was therefore as much unconstitutional in the colonies as it was in England. It was decided by the Court of King's Bench in England, Lord Mansfield being Chief Justice, before our Revolution, and while the English charters were the fundamental law of the colonies, that the principles of English liberty were so plainly incompatible with slavery that even if a slaveholder from another part of the world brought his slave into England, though only for a temporary purpose and with no intention of remaining, he nevertheless thereby gave the slave his liberty. Previous to this decision, the privilege of bringing slaves into England for temporary purposes and of carrying them away had long been tolerated. This decision was given in the year 1772, and for aught I see, it was equally obligatory in this country as in England, and must have freed every slave in this country if the question had then been raised here. But the slaves knew not his rights, and he had no one to raise the question for him. Well, I'll say this: shortly after the Somerset case, there's another case in Massachusetts that Brother Grimion Ill put us up on, called the case of Mumbet, the Elizabeth Freeman case, where it's one of the they call them the freedom suits. And this was a slave woman, a black woman who was enslaved in in Massachusetts, who sued for her freedom and won. So let's go further. The fact that slavery was tolerated in the colonies, listen to this, the fact that slavery was tolerated in the colonies is no evidence of its legality. For slavery was tolerated to a certain extent in England, as we have already seen, for many years previous to the decision just cited. That is, the holders of slaves from abroad were allowed to bring their slaves into England, hold them during their stay there, and carry them away when they went. But the toleration of this practice did not make it lawful, notwithstanding all customs, not palpably and grossly contrary to the principles of English liberty, have great weight in England in establishing law. The fact that England tolerated, that means did not punish criminally, the African slave trade at that time, could not legally establish slavery in the colonies any more than it did in England, especially in defiance of the positive requirements of the charters, that the colonial legislation should be consonant to reason and not repugnant to the laws of England. Besides, the mere toleration of the slave trade could not make slavery itself the right of property of man lawful anywhere, not even on board the slave ship. Toleration of a wrong is not a law, and especially the toleration of a wrong, that means the bare omission to punish it criminally, does not legalize one's claim to property obtained by such wrong. Even if a wrong can be legalized at all, so as to enable one to acquire rights of property by such wrong, it can be done only by an explicit and positive provision. The English statutes on the subject of the slave trade never attempted to legalize the right of property of man in any of the 13 North American colonies. It's doubtful whether they ever attempted to do it anywhere else. It's also doubtful whether Parliament had the power, or perhaps rather it is certain that they had not the power to legalize it anywhere if they had attempted to do so. And the cautious and curious phraseology of their statutes on the subjects indicates plainly that they themselves either doubted their power to legalize it or feared to exercise it. They have therefore chosen to connive at slavery, to insinuate, intimate, and imply for approbation of it, rather than risk an affirmative enactment declaring that one man may be the property of another. But Lord Mansfield said in Somerset's case that slavery was so odious that nothing can be suffered to support it but positive law. No such positive law, I presume, was ever passed by Parliament, certainly not with reference to any of these 13 colonies. So let me stop sharing that. I want to read what Lord Mansfield actually said, and then we're going to move forward. Let me read what he actually said, because this is important, and I'm sure.
Hey,
Professor, go ahead.
Classes and stuff. This is Professor Ali.
No doubt. Let's see here. Hold on one second. I'm sure Professor Darity knows. He knows exactly what we're talking about here. You know, so
indeed, make sure y'all hit the like button. Make sure y'all sharing this out. When we are building up our case for reparations, this is the information that will become vital in any committee or commission that is formed. So we're putting in a lot of the legwork already. Let me know when you're ready, brother.
Yeah, hold on one second.
While he's doing that, brother, Josh or Logic, y'all wanted to jump in?
Yeah, so it's amazing to understand the fact of the question of citizenship needs to be talked about more, because a lot of people have just blindly accepted this fact that property can be taken in men, and that we have this conversation about, well, we were just property, and we want to have a legal argument. And a lot of people kind of try to dismiss this conversation, say, well, slavery was legal, it wasn't illegal, so there is there's no legal argument there. So what we're posing now is understanding that when you're saying that there's no legal argument, we're proving that it was unconstitutional. So, and there's nothing in the legal framework that establishes any right of anyone from colonial America transitioning into the National Republic of, the United States of America, that grants any legal authority to take property in men on a federal level, right? So, are you ready, Ali? Or
Yeah. Now check this. I'm gonna read.
He said
I'm gonna give you a little background.
They had to connive, and there was no positive.
Mhm.
Yeah, you was breaking up, Josh.
Yeah.
Oh, my bad. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, it was going in and out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you going in and out.
Okay. I was just saying that, he just read how they said they had to connive. There was nothing there as far as positive law that affirmed that slavery, like they wouldn't, and that was probably the reason why they didn't try to put anything on the books that explicitly permitted slavery or legislated slavery explicitly, because then it would probably wouldn't hold up an illegal argument.
That's right. Now check this, because that's exactly what happened. So the case that Lysander Spooner is mentioning is the Somerset versus Stewart case from 1772. This is occurring while you're still dealing with colonial America. There is no United States yet. 1772, also known as the case of Somerset with 2 T's, Somerset versus Stewart. It was a judgment of the English Court of King's Bench in 1772 relating to the right of an enslaved person on English soil not to be forcibly from the country and sent to Jamaica for sale. This is what Lord Mansfield decided in that particular case. Specifically, he states, the state of slavery is of such a nature that it is incapable of being introduced on any reasons, moral or political, but only by positive law, statute, which preserves its force long after the reasons, occasions, and time itself from whence it was created is erased from memory. It is so odious that nothing can be suffered to support it but positive law. Whatever inconveniences, therefore, may follow from the decision, I cannot say this case is allowed or approved by the law of England, and therefore the black must be discharged, set free. So this man Stewart, who brought this slave named Somerset into England, wind up having to set him free, because what Lord Mansfield winds up deciding is that there's no positive law, meaning a law enacted by any body of government that authorizes the institution of slavery, and it authorizes this man to take a person and then sell them as if he had the property rights to do so. So he said, no, you can't do it. Not in the English realm, you have to set him free. So that became a problem. And one of the things that many people talk about is that this case was one of the things that led up to the American Revolution, because the colonists felt that this case undermined their institution that they had that was their moneymaker, right? Slavery was their moneymaker. And so they felt that this case undermined it, along with other things that were happening, which we saw come up with the, what they call the coercive acts or oppressive acts and so forth that came with it, right? That led to the Boston Tea Party and everything else. So this is one of the things that led up to it, right? This particular case, because they felt like it undermined the institution of slavery, which was something that they were building their economy with. So let's go to something else. Really interesting. Now, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to remind the people why the framing of this is so important, because you have a country that decided that it was no longer going to follow English law when it came to the establishment of slavery and all of the different rules. So what America did in creating its own polity, creating its own country, determined that it would instead allow law. This is why allow slavery, but never ever make it something that was in positive law. never make it anything that was constitutional, etc. This bolsters the reparations claim one, and it really it really helps us understand what we mean when we say specificity, because this new form of slavery that is created in the United States of America, whose remnants are still felt until this day, is something that is unique to the people called African American or Negro or Black, colored, Ethiopian, etc., etc. So I just wanted to frame that for everybody that's listening in. This is something unique to America. So only America can answer for it. We can't look to this broader diaspora claim, because America can't pay for what happened in Jamaica or Haiti or any other colonized place, because America's system was something uniquely American, which is why I started out reading from the book, The Invention of the White Race. Can anybody, is everybody on?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I just got a message. Yeah, Ali, you.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we hear you now.
You good?
Yeah, but this is crazy. My screen is frozen.
We can hear you loud and clear, bro. Just keep rolling.
Yeah, my screen is frozen. So what I think I'm gonna have to do is go out and come back in. It was going so well. This is crazy. My whole screen is frozen.
But we can see you just fine. Whatever problems you have on your end, we can see and hear you just fine.
Yeah,
but he can't read.
I'm gonna have to go out and come back in. Just give me a second, man. This whole thing is frozen.
And so while we're waiting for Ali to step back up, I just want to say, so what we're going to progress to is showing you a situation, right? So we left out on the colonial period where there's no legal constitution of slavery, right? Now we're going to go into the foundation of the republic known as the United States of America. And when we're talking about citizenship, right? Citizenship is like rooted in allegiance. Citizenship is rooted in allegiance. That's why we have the Pledge of Allegiance, right, to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation. You know how it goes, right? So citizenship is rooted in allegiance, and we're going to establish and talk about how the allegiance of the native Black American was greater than anyone, was as great as any patriot and equal to any patriot, if not greater. And after Ali brings us to that period of 1776, I'm going to come in and start talking to you about our contribution. You cannot be not considered a citizen if you are a part of the incorporating effort to gain independence, right? If your effort, your blood, your literal blood, life and tears and sweat and fighting ability actually help to establish the republic, how are you not a citizen? Who do you go to ask for citizenship? You were on the battlefield killing and defending and fighting for the independence of this republic to even exist in the first place. So what we're understanding is we have our fingerprints. The American descendants of slavery's ancestors were native Black Americans. They were native to the foundation and the formation of this republic, and it was forged in blood and battle. It was forged in blood and battle the same way all nations are forged, right? So when they severed those political bands that tied them to England, we were a part of that. We were the first, we had Crispus Attucks took the first bullet. You understand? So our ancestors are rooted into that battle. It wasn't just Paul Revere writing, talking about the British are coming. Our ancestors was riding with them. We're going to get into that. Ali, if you're set up, go ahead.
Yeah.
And when we get to that, we'll continue.
All right, so this is the case. I apologize about that, but this is the case that I was talking about. Elizabeth Freeman, also known as Mum Beck, right? And so her case is important because it goes to undermine the idea of well, I'll say this. It actually goes to support the idea of slave citizenship, right? This is a crazy thing right now, because I brought this up with that professor that you was talking about, Josh, from Howard University. Slaves being citizens of the United States, right? This is a foreign concept because everybody figures that blacks weren't citizens, let alone the slaves, right? So a lot of people are like, okay, I can understand you saying free blacks might have been at some point in certain places considered citizens, but what the heck do you mean slaves were citizens, right? Well, one of the things that they said is that slaves have no civil or political rights, right? So this particular
civil litter mortus.
Civil litter mortus.
Civil litter mortus.
That is the Roman or the Latin terminology for it.
Hey, one second.
Yeah.
One second, Ali, before you continue with this great education, right? So before we go to that, right, we're going to get to the part of the formation of the country. And there's a comment, Brother Abbott, could you pull it up real quick, by Michael Alfred, right? And understand this is very important. And I'm glad that he said this, right? Because it highlights another point about choice. Yes, a lot of black folks and understand reasonably so chose to fight with the loyalists. They chose to fight with the loyalists because nobody in their right mind thought America, these little ragtag 13 colonies, were going to beat the greatest empire in the world at that time. So most black folks did fight with the loyalists, right? Because they was getting promised manumission and all of that, right? But that doesn't change what we're talking about. That even emboldens and even emphasizes and reinforces what we're saying. So we know the obstacle and the opposition we were up against, and our ancestors chose to be patriots, to be American patriots, in spite of going against the biggest empire in the world. In those days, they said the sun could never set on the British Empire. It was so vast and so widespread. So our courageous ancestors, right, the few of them, our ancestors, said we're not going to side with the loyalists. We believe in this principle of Americanism. And they sided with the patriots, you understand, and fought a battle that no one thought that they could win. Nobody in their right mind would have bet on the patriots. They would have bet on the loyalists because they're the British Empire. So that goes to the magnitude of the choice of our ancestors who said we're going to be American patriots and we're going to fight the biggest and largest empire in the world. So yes, a great deal of our people did go to the loyalist side, but our ancestors, the ones that we descend from, were patriots.
That's right. That's right. So let me read from this particular case, right? Elizabeth Freeman. So let's give the background. Elizabeth Freeman was probably born in 1742 to enslaved African parents in Claverack, New York. At the age of 6 months, she was purchased, along with her sister, by John Ashley of Sheffield, Massachusetts, whom she served until she was nearly 40. By then, she was known as Mum Bet and had a young daughter known as Little Bet. Her husband had been killed while fighting in the Revolutionary War. One day, the mistress angrily tried to hit Mum Bet's sister with a heated kitchen shovel. Mum Bet intervened and received the blow instead. Furious, she left the house and refused to return. When Colonel Ashley appealed to the law for her return, she called on Theodore Sedgwick, a lawyer from Stockbridge who had anti-slavery sentiments, and asked for his help to sue for her freedom. Mum Bet had listened carefully while the wealthy men she served talked about the Bill of Rights and the new state constitution, and she decided that if all people were born free and equal, here we go, then the laws must apply to her too. Sedgwick agreed to take the case, which was joined by another of Ashley's slaves, a man called Brom. So the case was ultimately called Brom and Bet versus Ashley, and this was argued before a county court. The jury ruled in favor of Bet and Brom, making them the first enslaved African Americans to be freed under the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780, and ordered Ashley to pay them 30 shillings and costs. This municipal case set a precedent that was affirmed by the state courts in the Quock Walker case, and ultimately led to the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts. So understand something. Not only was this woman and the other person, Brom, a slave, were slaves, but they demonstrated civil and political rights. And they were compensated by the former slave master and had their court costs paid for. Imagine that, right? So remember, Justice Taney says in 1856 in the Dred Scott case that blacks had no rights that the white man was bound to respect. He also said in his dicta that blacks were not considered members of the society at the formation of the United States. This case was in 1780, right? The United States is formed in 1776. This case was in 1780. So you had slaves demonstrating the rights of citizenship in the courts. Slaves. And
That's
what
right.
does she reference? She references the Declaration of Independence. She says if all people were made free and equal, then it has to apply to her too, and was able to use that and win her suit and get compensated at the same time. 1780. This is almost 100 years before the Dred Scott case comes, like 80 years or so, right? So that just goes to show you that the people were involved from the colonial period to the time of the formation. This particular time period is under the Articles of Confederation right before the 1787 Constitution. So before the Constitution, under the Articles of Confederation, you have this slave woman suing for her freedom and winning. And her case helps to lead to the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts by showing it was unconstitutional according to the Constitution of Massachusetts.
Ain't that something? How is a person who does not
Wow.
have citizenship rights enter a court and sue and win? Not only sue, but win. How do they do? How do they even get representation if we're not citizens, right? Only citizens, right? Especially at that time in American life, have that type of right to access the court system, to get representation in court, and to even win, right? So we're showing something. And I want to talk about something I've seen in the chat again, right? So when I was talking about the choice our ancestors made, don't misinterpret what I said. So Michael Alfred said not true because only some of the 100,000 was reparated. Most were re-enslaved by the Americans. So your ancestors come both from the loyalist and the patriot side. I'm not disputing that. I'm telling you what was involved in the decision making. The promise. I didn't say they made good on their promise. The promise of manumission was what got those 100,000 people to go over there. I didn't say the British made good on it. I said that's what those, and I understand that kind of a choice. But I said in lieu of that type of decision making, it was a harder decision to say, you know what, I'm going to side with the Patriots. And I didn't say that some of those loyalists didn't get re-enslaved. I didn't say that. So don't make up your own narrative in the chat and try to have your own kind of historical, like, don't do that, right? Understand what we're talking about.
Look, let me say real quick, bro. I didn't mean to cut you. I've been doing this for a minute, and you know, some people come into the chats and they come only to challenge. They come only to say that you are wrong. You know, they're not necessarily trying to come and offer some more information. That's why he led the second comment with "you're wrong." And I was going to type to him, brother, I don't know if you heard him, but he basically agreed with your whole comment. But that wasn't the point that he was making. So, but I left it alone because I know how some people can get in the chat. And on the only thing you did just now was reiterate that point.
Right.
There's nothing wrong in what you said at all. So I just wanted to just say that to that brother, and everybody else that's listening in.
Let me go further. Let me go into this.
It really doesn't deviate us from the point because it actually emphasizes the decision making, right? If your ancestors was giving the promise, they didn't know if anyone was going to make good on it or not. But like, you're going to get, free up out of your situation.
Right.
That's the easier decision to make. You know what I'm saying? Like, they'll go fight with them, right? But those of us, we're going to be patriots. Those were some really bold, bad individuals. And I'm going to start talking about how bold and bad they was in a minute.
Right, because ultimately they're the ones that won the fight. Those little 5,000 are the ones who won. So let's look at the Dred Scott. Let's look at the Dred Scott case. Right, this is the dissenting. This is a part of the dissent from Justice Curtis, and we've read from this before. But this is important, and it goes towards the idea of black citizenship of free persons. But we're gonna touch on once more the citizenship of even enslaved people and how and why they were citizens, right? That's going to take us into the 3/5 compromise as well, to determine whether any free persons descended from Africans held in slavery were citizens of the United States under the Confederation, and consequently at the time of the adoption of the Constitution of the United States. It's only necessary to know whether any such persons were citizens of either of the states under the Confederation at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. Of this, there can be no doubt. At the time of the ratification of the Articles of Confederation, all free native-born inhabitants of the states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, though descended from African slaves, were not only citizens of those states, but such of them as had the other necessary qualifications possessed the franchise of electors on equal terms with other citizens. The Supreme Court of North Carolina, in the case of State versus Manuel, has declared the law of that state on this subject in terms which I believe to be as sound law in the other states I have enumerated as it was in North Carolina. According to the laws of this state, says Judge Gaston, in delivering the opinion of the court, all human beings within it who are not slaves fall within one of two classes. Whatever distinctions may have existed in the Roman laws between citizens and free inhabitants, they are unknown to our institutions. Before our revolution, all free persons born within the dominions of the King of Great Britain, whatever their color or complexion, were native-born British subjects. Those born out of allegiance were aliens. Allegiance is an important word because we're going to go into that again. Slavery did not exist in England, but it did in the British colonies. Slaves were not, in legal parlance, persons, but property. The moment the incapacity, the disqualification of slavery was removed, they became persons and were then either British subjects or not British subjects, according as they were or were not born within the allegiance of the British king. Upon the Revolution, no other change took place in the laws of North Carolina than was consequent on the transition from a colony dependent on a European king to a free and sovereign state. Slaves remained slaves. British subjects in North Carolina became North Carolina freemen. Foreigners, until made members of the state, remained aliens. Slaves manumitted here became freemen, and therefore, if born within North Carolina, are citizens of North Carolina, and all free persons born within the state are born citizens of the state. The Constitution extended the elective franchise to every free man who had arrived at the age of 21 and paid a public tax, and it is a matter of universal notoriety that under it, free persons, without regard to color, claimed and exercised the franchise until it was taken from free men of color years since by our Constitution. In the State versus Newcomb, decided in 1844, the same court referred to this case of the State versus Manuel and said, quote, that case underwent a very laborious investigation both by the bar and the bench. The case was brought here by appeal and was felt to be one of great importance in principle. It was considered with an anxiety and care worthy of principle involved, and which give it a controlling influence and authority on all questions of similar character. An argument from speculative premises, however well chosen, that the then state of opinion in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was not consistent with the natural rights of people of color who were born on the soil, and that they were not, by the Constitution of 1780 of that state, admitted to the condition of citizens, would be received with surprise by the people of that state who know their own political history. Because, see, listen, this goes back to the Mumbet case. Same thing. They know the political history. So when you try to tell them, they saying in Massachusetts that people of color were not citizens, they think you're crazy. It is true beyond all controversy that persons of color descended from African slaves were by that Constitution made citizens of the state, and such of them as have had the necessary qualifications have held and exercised the elective franchise as citizens from that time to the present. The Constitution of New Hampshire conferred the elective franchise upon every inhabitant of the state having the necessary qualifications, which color or descent was not one. Constitution of New York gave the right to vote to every male inhabitant who shall have resided, making no discrimination between free colored persons and others. That of New Jersey to all inhabitants of the colony of full age who are worth 50 pounds proclamation money, clear state. New York, by its Constitution of 1820, required colored persons to have some qualifications as prerequisites for voting. So this is when they started to pull back on people's rights, right? Because this is what they're saying. They began to pull back on their rights. Fourth and listen to this. This is important. This is important. The fourth of the fundamental articles of the Confederation was as follows: the free inhabitants of each of these states, paupers, vagabonds, and fugitives from justice excepted, shall be entitled to all the privileges and immunities of free citizens in the several states. The fact that free persons of color were citizens of some of the several states, and the consequence that this fourth article of the Confederation would have the effect to confer on such persons the privileges and immunities of general citizenship, were not only known to those who framed and adopted those articles, but the evidence is decisive that the fourth article was intended to have that effect, and that more restricted language, which would have excluded such persons, was deliberately and purposely rejected. What are they talking about? On the 25th of June, 1778, the Articles of Confederation being under consideration by the Congress, the delegates from South Carolina moved to amend this article by inserting after the word free and before the word inhabitants, the word white, so that the privileges and immunities of general citizenship would be secured only to white persons. What happened? 2 states voted for the amendment, 8 states voted against it, and the vote of 1 state was divided. The language of the article stood unchanged, and both by its terms of inclusion, free inhabitants, and the strong implication from its terms of exclusion, being paupers, vagabonds, and fugitives from justice, who alone were accepted, it's clear that under the Confederation and at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, free colored persons of African descent might be, and by reason of their citizenship in certain states, were entitled to the privileges and immunities of general citizenship of the United States. Then we can go, this goes into the piece that we've read before. Did the Constitution of the United States deprive them or their descendants of citizenship? That Constitution was ordained and established by the people of the United States through the action in each state, or those persons who were qualified by its laws to act thereon in behalf of themselves and all other citizens of that state. In some of the states, as we've seen, colored persons were among those qualified by law to act on this subject. These colored persons were not only included in the body of the people of the United States by whom the Constitution was ordained and established, but in at least 5 of the states, they had the power to act, and doubtless did act by their suffrages upon the question of its adoption. Talking about foundational. It would be strange if we were to find in that instrument, the Constitution, anything that which deprived of their citizenship any part of the people of the United States who were among those by whom it was established. Yo, what are they talking about? Black people helped to establish this thing? Man, come on.
See, that's the, before you come in, Logic, you muted too, Logic. I just want to, you know, like I said, we've touched on this topic before. I'm glad that the audience is, you know, our audience is growing a little bit more. so that you could get an understanding of how important our reparations push really is and the factors. Well, we know why it's important. Our people are collectively broke, but the factors by which we establish this claim, and it deals with the fact that America enslaved its citizens. It went against its own constitution. And before my brother Logic comes in, I want to read something real quick from Justice Curtis's dissent, right? He says this: the Constitution, having recognized the rule that persons born within the several states are citizens of the United States, one of four things must be true. First, that the Constitution itself has described what native-born persons shall or shall not be citizens of the United States, or second, that it has empowered Congress to do so, or third, that all free persons born within the several states are citizens of the United States, or fourth, that it is left to each state to determine what free persons born within its limits shall be citizens of such state and thereby be citizens of the United States. If there be a such thing as citizenship of the United States acquired by birth within the states, which the Constitution expressly recognizes and no one denies, then these four alternatives embrace the entire subject. And it only remains to select that one which is true. So what he's getting at here is basically that the states themselves never had the right, and he breaks this down as Brother Ali Bey was just reading, Brother Ali was just reading, by noting that we, through suffrage rights, meaning our ability, the elective franchise to go and cast our ballots and vote for representatives in at least 5 states, proves that the states never had the power to enslave us. And this is going to bring us into this whole issue of what's called the 3/5 compromise. So I want my brother Logic to come in.
Yeah, no doubt. So I'm picking up from where Ali left off, right? We're talking about Native Black American citizenship, right? He already said, we already establishing citizenship can even be had and lived out in a slave status. You're just being deprived access to it. Don't be confused with being oppressed, right? We're still being oppressed now and we're citizens, right? They're just not in a chattel slavery situation. But the same thing was being done then. And I'm going to show you something here in a second. But just understand this concept, right? Our brother Ali showed that, there was no legal framework authorizing slavery or property in men, right? Nothing in the Constitution that authorized that or created a legal pathway for it. So even as slaves, we were still citizens. That was the way of oppressing us in those days. That was the chattel slavery, was the American oppression, the systemic racism being lived out in those days. It's being lived out in another expression today. But in that day, it was lived out through chattel slavery. We were still citizens. Why? Because of this, right? Check it out, right? No one can argue, right, that a patriot and a citizen go hand in hand. Or if they don't go hand in hand, a patriot should be the first person granted citizenship, right? Because a patriot is someone who fought to establish the country. So what was our ancestors doing in regards to being a patriot, right? Let's check it out.
Can you blow your browser up a little bit, bro?
I don't know if I can blow it up, but I can read, so I'll let y'all know where y'all can find it. I'll let y'all know where y'all can find it, and y'all can read it.
Read on, brother. Read on.
I don't want to start messing it up. I'm not really good.
No, you good, bro. You good, bro.
It says, Black patriots of the American Revolution Americans have lost much of their knowledge of basic historical facts, particularly those relating to the American Revolution. In fact, a recent survey of high-performing college seniors found that more thought that Ulysses S. Grant, a Civil War general in the 1860s, commanded the troops at Yorktown than George Washington, who actually did lead those troops in the 1780s. Since advanced college seniors cannot identify the commander-in-chief of the American Revolution, it is not surprising that today's Americans know even less about the thousands of African Americans who fought during the Revolution, or that they participated in every major battle of the war. Although this part of our history is unfamiliar today, it was known in previous generations because of the writings of Black historians such as William Nell, an award-winning young scholar in Boston during the 1830s. He studied law and became the first Black American to hold a post in the federal government. In 1852, he authored Services of Colored Americans in the Wars of 1776 and 1812. And 3 years later, he penned The Colored Patriots of the American Revolution. This issue is dedicated to a recovery of the knowledge of our Black patriot heroes, to whom today's Americans of all colors owe a debt of gratitude. If that's not talking about the spirit of citizenship, I don't know what is. Right. So let's go and start talking about some of these historical events that took place that gave way for anyone to be a citizen. Right. You wouldn't have citizens if it wasn't for the Black patriots, because they were so instrumental in some of the key events that made American citizenship possible in the first place.
Hey, hold on. That was powerful, man. Because if you think about it, if we don't help, if our ancestors don't help win this war, nobody's citizens at the end of the day.
We all subjects of the crown, the British crown.
No. Well, if you look at it from the Confederate standpoint, right? If you go to just the standpoint of the Confederacy, if our people don't help, and that's what I was referencing, so my bad. But if we don't help in that particular war, the Civil War, we are still slaves. Nobody is a citizen, and we revert back to some form of kingship or some form of what's going on, what we see in our government today with Trump, the Attorney General, his administration, the Supreme Court siding more on issues of conservatism because they're largely conservative, et cetera, et cetera. That's basically what I was getting at. My bad.
No, okay, no, that was a good point. Now, I'm gonna hit and jump around to a couple different things, because I got a couple important things I want to bring out in the limited time that we have tonight, right? So I just want to bring this point home about some of the key points of the establishing of the American Republic, right? You don't get America without our ancestors' activity and engagement, right? So let's talk about Jordan Freeman, Lambo Lambert, Latham, right? You don't even know who these people are. I know.
Hold on. Somebody got to mute out.
Okay.
I'm hearing a crazy echo.
All right. In 1781, both Black and white soldiers fought side by side at the Battle of Gordon Heights, Connecticut. The American force of only 84 men, led by Lieutenant Colonel William Ledyard, was attempting to defend the town of New London from a large invading force led by American trader turned British General Benedict Arnold. Y'all heard the story of Benedict Arnold, right? After suffering heavy casualties against the overwhelming British numbers, Colonel Ledyard and his remaining troops retreated to tiny Fort Griswold, equipped with only a few small cannon. The Americans eventually ran out of ammunition, and when the British charged the fort, the Americans used their rifles as clubs, fighting back the British with only bayonets and pikes. The British began scaling the walls of the fort. Upon reaching the top, the the British officers leading the attack, Major Montgomery, was speared and killed by Black patriot Jordan Freeman. Come on now, Jordan. That's what I'm talking about. The British rushed over the walls and quickly overran the fort, overpowering the few remaining Americans. A British officer then asked the American prisoners who commanded the fort. Colonel Ledyard replied, I did. Once you do not, I did once, right? He said that one time. And it says, you do know, and handed his sword to the British officer as was customary with a surrender. The British officer then took Ledyard's own sword and thrusted it through Ledyard's body all the way to the hilt. The act was witnessed by all the remaining Americans, including Black patriot Lambert Latham. When the flagpole of the fort had earlier been shot down by the British during the battle, Lambert grabbed the American flag and held it high until he was captured. Latham had stood silently with the other American prisoners, but upon witnessing the cold-blooded murder of his commander, Neal records what next occurred. Lambert, retaliated upon the British officer by thrusting his bayonet through his body. Lambert in return received from the enemy 33 bayonet wounds and thus fell nobly, avenging the death of the commander. The British, angered by the loss of so many of their soldiers at the hands of so few Americans, promptly slaughtered all the remaining Americans left in the fort, including Jordan Freeman. Interestingly, Freeman had been a slave of Colonel Ledyard and commander of the fort, but had been freed by him. As a free man, Freeman had remained in the area and married. When the region came under attack from the British, Freeman chose to stay and fight for America side by side with the man who had once, been his owner. Today, at the site of Old Fort Griswold is a plaque showing the monument in which Jordan Freeman killed the attacking British officer. I'm gonna leave that story right there because it's making the point that I'm driving home of how our blood goes hand in hand with the blood of those other patriots that get so much recognition, and we don't. You don't hear this story nowhere, right? We defeated the British, but it was through our heroism and our contributions that made this thing possible. These stories were being told once upon a time, but they haven't been told any longer. No one's telling these stories about our ancestors' patriot acts, right? And patriots fought for the right to even create the idea of citizenship. So then we get to a thing, right? Well, let's fast forward in time. We have the American Revolution. It was a success. The Americans won. The Patriots beat the Loyalists, right? So moving forward in time. Now what do we have, right? We have slavery and all that. Now we're still focusing on citizenship. We have a very common term today that everyone knows. Everyone's heard of the term birthright citizenship. So we go from a state to where we fought to create the country, but now in certain areas of the country, we're not even being recognized as citizens. In some places we are, and in some places we're not. But now there's a thing called birthright citizenship, which eventually got adopted into constitutional law, but was already being lived out and exercised, right? By who? Where was birthright citizenship, and what was birthright citizenship founded in? It was an idea that not someone just imagined. It was based upon a real thing. Now let's talk about it. I'm gonna share. I don't even have to share the screen. I'm just gonna read it. Right. These are the origins of birthright citizenship, and I'm going to recommend a book. Right. When I read this, historian Martha S. Jones. Right. Get this book called Birthright Citizenship by Martha S. Jones. Right. So historian Martha S. Jones, central concern in her new book, Birthright Citizens, is not the legislative debate surrounding the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, often collectively called Reconstruction Amendments, for their role in establishing a post-Civil War legal order. Instead, she is interested in their prehistory during the antebellum period. Specifically, she examines how free blacks made their mark on the broader question of political belonging by simply refusing to be treated as anything less than full citizens. Let me move this down so I can see everything.
While you're doing that, everybody that's watching from Facebook and Twitter, please come over to the YouTube channel. I'm putting the link in the chat on Facebook, and I'm going to end the stream on Facebook and on Twitter. So come on over to the YouTube channel, family.
Yeah, so they but arrest their actions with sophisticated legal arguments that these rights were already enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, Supreme Court decision, and natural law. Go back to what that founding document is. The Declaration of Independence declaring all men free and equal, right? So there was nothing in that constitutional framework at that time that said black folks were not men. You have to understand that the founding document, right? And this is what these people were using to support their existence as citizens, saying that their right to be citizens was enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution, Supreme Court decisions at that time, and natural law, right? Or natural law or positive law, right? Jones scholarship depicts a model of alternative constitutional lawmaking through a generation of local norms, right? Understand this. Though she toggles between national, regional, and state perspectives, Jones always returns to Baltimore. Do the history on Baltimore, ADOS family. A lot of our history is rooted in these places that have been forgotten, right? Baltimore, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi. Do the history on these states, right? To illustrate her argument, weaving together court records and contemporaneous newspaper accounts, Jones convincingly demonstrates that free black people laid claim to U.S. citizenship by behaving like citizens rather than waiting for others to confer that status upon them. They made contracts, sued people, testified against whites in court, sought relief from debts, worshiped more or less as they wished, and exercised their right to bear arms. You understand? Well before any judicial or legislative princes granted their rights. She writes, free black men and women seized them. You understand? What Jones sketches in an approach to reshaping constitutional norms that depends neither on a favorable national consensus nor on piling up electoral victories, antebellum blacks traded on cultural notions of respectability and proved they were leading lives deserving of respect and recognition. Now, this is something that you might not have heard of a lot. But if you go and understand this very same Baltimore society where you see people living out citizenship, right? There was nothing stopping them from doing all the things every other citizen did right there in Baltimore. So there's a lot to this story of American citizenship that hasn't been told. Our ancestors are the greatest Americans that existed because they dealt with more obstacles and they dealt with more opposition than any other American. And we overcame more than any other American has. We are original Americans. So the crux or the nexus of the argument is it's not just that slavery was bad, but that America enslaved its own citizens and treated just like the Japanese interned individuals were America's own citizens. So were the slaves who produced the economic wealth of America. We were citizens in this country. But the reason why we don't understand that is because there was no uniform constitutional language that established any defined parameters of what citizenship is. So states did what they wanted to do while the federal government allowed it. They tolerated it. It wasn't constitutional, but it was tolerated because of the financial profits that were being had and being generated. But there was nothing legal or constitutional about it. So our claim is there is a legal claim in what we're talking about as far as reparations from chattel slavery moving forward. So I'm gonna stop right there. I think Ali, you got something you want to say?
Yeah. I wanted to go further into.
But before you go in, brother Ali, I just want to give brother Josh the chance to comment on anything. I know this was y'all show tonight, but I just want to give Josh the chance to.
Man, I wanted to say, look, man, this is heavy. You know, it's eye-opening for a lot of people. We really diving into the history and reframing history, and it's a history that not many people know about or knew to even look up to research, right? But I think the interesting thing when we're talking about citizenship and showing how far back our citizenship goes, think about today when we are getting the least of the policy prescriptions that citizens should get from its government, and people who are not even citizens are getting the same treatment. People who are not even citizens, people are getting the rights of citizenship and are getting more offered to them as far as policy or resource government or all these type of things than the people who are more foundational than anybody in the country, and then the people who made America have to live by its foundational documents. Like we had to make them. Like think about this. When we were reading about Mom Bet, she sued based on the Constitution. What was it was a Massachusetts Constitution, right? Because it wasn't the U.S. Constitution wasn't enacted then. But she sued based on that. So when you sue, you're making somebody have to take the law that was written legislatively and prove it in the courtroom. So when we say we made America have to abide by, and prove that it's true, that its laws are true, that's just a fact. That's just what happened historically. And man, I mean, it's just crazy when you compare, like, somebody can come over here illegally and you're going to give them the world. You're going to say, I think Joe Biden said, on day one, you get this. Where's the day one policies for the day one citizens? Like, that doesn't make
Wow.
That need to be on a t-shirt.
Yeah, man. The day one policy for the day one citizens, man. That's powerful.
For real. That is powerful.
It again, Josh. Say it again.
Where is the day one policy for the day one citizens? Please show me that.
Oh yeah.
Powerful. Let me run through something real quick. There was a representative from Ohio by the name of John Bingham. And when in 1862, when they were debating the emancipation of blacks in the District of Columbia, this man, John Armour Bingham, you guys can look him up, argued on behalf of quote unquote black citizenship, right? And so let me just read to you from the congressional debates what this man said, right? Well, let me start with a quote from him because this quote was powerful. He says in this quote, "What was your declaration at Philadelphia on the 4th of July, 1776? That all men are created equal, but a reiteration of the great truth announced by the apostle of the Nazarene." Yo, he's making the Christian case for reparations too. Now, pay attention. So let me read to you what he actually said about citizenship, and even went further into citing a man by the name of James Kent, who's known for his commentaries on American law, American jurisprudence, who's been referenced as an authority by many legal minds since this man's time, James Kent's commentaries. But okay, so this man here, John Bingham from Ohio, said this about Negro citizenship and including the citizenship of enslaved people. He says the Constitution leaves no room for doubt upon this subject. The words natural born citizen of the United States occur in it, and the other provision also occurs in it that Congress shall have power to pass a uniform system of naturalization. To naturalize a person is to admit him to citizenship. What are natural born citizens but those born within the Republic? Those born within the Republic, whether black or white, are citizens by birth, natural born citizens. Understand, you guys, this is 1862. There isn't even a 13th Amendment yet. There is no such word as white in your Constitution. Citizenship, therefore, does not depend upon complexion any more than it depends upon the rights of election or of office. All from other lands who, by the terms of your laws and in compliance with their provisions, become naturalized, are adopted citizens of the United States. All other persons born within the Republic, of parents owing allegiance to no other sovereignty, are natural born citizens. Gentlemen, we can find no exception to this statement touching natural born citizens except what is said in the Constitution in relation to Indians. The reason why that exception was made in the Constitution is apparent to everybody. The several Indian tribes were recognized at the organization of this government as independent sovereignties. They were treated with as such, and they have been dealt with by the government ever since as separate sovereignties. Therefore, they were excluded from the general rule. I adopt the words of that man whose clear intellect, through a long and laborious life, contributed much that will endure to the jurisprudence of his country, the lamented Chancellor Kent of New York, who declared that every person of African descent born in this land is a citizen of the United States, and although born in a condition of slavery under the laws of any state in which he might be held to service or labor, still he was a citizen of the United States under disabilities. That's a powerful statement.
Say that again now, bro. Come on now. What was he?
A citizen of the United States under disabilities. And what we mean by disabilities is no different than an incarcerated individual who no longer has the right to vote, no longer has the right to hold office. Many of his civil and political rights have been stripped from him. So, in other words, it's about what this man is saying to you when he referenced having no allegiance to any other sovereignty. He's saying the fact that these slaves, whether their allegiance was of their own accord or whether it was forced, they have no allegiance to any other sovereignty. There is no African sovereignty that these people had allegiance to. And the reason we know that is because none of the African sovereignties came to claim any of those people. There was no bond, right?
Where were they?
Huh?
Where were they?
There was no bond.
They knew where to come find us, huh? You know? They
knew where to come find us. But you got to remember, we're the descendants of the people who were kicked out of that place. You understand what I'm saying? So they knew where to find us. They were doing business with these people, right? But nobody from nobody from the Ashanti Kingdom, nobody from the Dahomey or Benin, nobody from Senegal, nobody from any of those places came to claim us, right? So we have no allegiance to any, those people had no allegiance to any other sovereignty. Even if their allegiance was a forced one here, they were still, they had no other allegiance, right? And so
when we talk about, when we read in, I think it was Narc or Cobra, one of them, and they plan and they talking about we want to be able to repatriate. What are they talking about repatriate to?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Which
I
one? Repatriate to which one of them countries that came to come back and claim us, or which they're sold? I mean, where are we talking about?
Look, patriation is a modern term dealing with nation states, right? So when you're talking about those African kingdoms, they didn't have nation states until the Europeans came and made nation states over there. There was no nation state, so there was nothing to repatriate back to. The people who were being put into Liberia was being put into a colony of the United States, and they would, you might could call that repatriation because of the way that thing was set up. But those kingdoms, there's nothing to pay. Either you are subject of the sovereign of whatever kingdom you're talking about, or you're not. There's no patriation or repatriation or none of that kind of stuff. That's a modern term.
Let me say so. Let me say this, right? Why would you be considering repatriating somewhere else when your ancestors were actually patriots here fighting to build the country? How are you going to repatriate somewhere else when your parents were the patriots here in America? You see, the problem is we look at this history as a history that is not ours, that we have just been brought into, not that we created. We have had a lot of different kind of scholars and Afrocentrists and different people have taught us the history and made us think that this is not our own history because you didn't know about the brothers that I talked about just a minute ago. And there's many more that I can keep. There's many more that I can talk about even longer, right? So our parents are patriots here. Our lineage is patriated into the formation of this American Republic. So there is no repatriating. Once you establish a new country, right? That is your origin place. That is your country now. You've severed the political bands that tied you into anything else. New nations are forged through war all throughout history. And nobody's talking about, once you fight that battle and once you have that war, that creates a new history for you. You're a new people, you're a new nation, and now everything starts. That's your starting point now from the nation that you created, right? And oftentimes we just don't look at our history as being a part of that creation mechanism that formed this republic. But our blood soaked the American flag just like all the other patriots. We forged this country. We fought the war. We put the feet in the ground. We did all that.
I just want us to address this real quick. We got this brother Michael Alfred in the chat. He has I want to say a warped sense of history, right? And how American citizenship works. He says you can be both. You can have American citizenship and another as well. Our history predates 1512 or 1619. This is another example of like cognitive dissonance, right? Where you just have these two conflicting points. Because once we become Americans in the United States of America, we lose that connectivity. Like my brother Logic has said on this show before, you can't find an aunt or uncle over in Africa right now. So you can't necessarily, let me see, he said you can have American citizenship and another as well. Anyone can have dual citizenship.
Right.
That
has nothing to do with what we're talking about. That's a whole other conversation. That's a modern conversation. We're talking about our citizenship as being foundational to this country. He's talking about something that can happen today. That doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. So let me just read this piece, right?
Hold on. One second. Before the brother put up two dates, he's talking about 15 something and 1619. There is no America. So what citizen are you talking about being dual with? You talking about being an English citizen and a citizen of Africa? Because there was no America before 1776. So the dates that you suggested don't line up with the American dual citizenship notion. So I don't. It doesn't make sense.
There was no countries at that time. There was no
Kingdom. They were kingdom.
involved. They were monarchies. So you had to be subjects at that time and not citizens.
Exactly.
There
There were kingdoms at that time.
So let's go into the 3/5. I know we need to hurry up and get to it. So look, here's the article I was telling you guys about the 3/5 clause, why its taint persists, right? By Paul Finkelman. This was in 2013 in The Root. President James Wagner of Emory University recently asserted that the 3/5 clause of the Constitution is a good example of how people with differing political views can find common ground. He was referring to the provision in the United States Constitution written in 1787 that counts each enslaved person as 3/5 of a person in order to determine state representation in Congress. The reason why I'm reading this is because I wanted to show ultimately how the southern states were playing around with the idea of enslaved people being citizens, right? This is how the 3/5 compromise even comes about. Wagner's support of compromise is admirable because he says that he was referring to the provision of the United States Constitution written in 1787 that counts each enslaved person as 3/5 of a person in order to determine state representation in Congress. That's not what the 3/5 compromise did, but this is what he's going to go into. Wagner's support of compromise is admirable. His historical analogy is not. It's perhaps not his fault, since he was responding to a scholarly presentation at his university. But Wagner's unfortunate use of the 3/5 clause has the virtue of bringing the issue of slavery back into the public debate. It is useful for Americans to contemplate how our slaveholding past tainted our Constitution. The 3/5 clause, frequently called the 3/5 compromise, was actually not much of a compromise at all. The provision was a huge victory for slavery and gave nothing to those who favored freedom, the power of a fraction. The 3/5 clause is perhaps the most misunderstood provision in the United States Constitution. The clause provides that representation in Congress will be based on, quote, the whole number of free persons and, quote, the 3/5 of all other persons. The other persons were slaves. Despite popular understandings, this provision did not declare that African Americans were 3/5 of a person. Rather, the provision declared that the slave states would get extra representation in Congress for their slaves, even though the states treated slaves purely as property. Thus, this was a provision that was not directly about race, but about status and the allocation of political power. Free blacks were counted in exactly the same way as whites. The clause did not say that a slave was 3/5 of a person. The clause said nothing about free blacks, who were treated by the clause exactly as free whites were. Rather, the clause provided a mathematical formula that allowed for the allocation of representatives in Congress that factored in the slave population. No slaves could vote in the country, although free blacks could vote in a number of states, and the clause did not provide a voice for slaves. This was about the distribution of political power among the states, a formula for influence. The origin of the clause illustrates the complexity of the issue. Under the Articles of Confederation, each state had a single vote in the National Congress. 1787, on the eve of the Constitutional Convention, this meant that Virginia, with about 690,000 people, and Pennsylvania, with about 430,000 people, had the same number of votes in Congress as Delaware, with a population under 60,000, and Rhode Island, with a population under 65,000. One of the goals of James Madison and the other framers was to replace this utterly undemocratic system of representation with representation in a new Congress based on population. Eventually, the Constitutional Convention would only partially achieve this admirable goal. The Senate continued to give the states equal representation, even though some states were dramatically larger than others. Thus, today, California's population is 70 times larger than Wyoming's, but they have the same number of votes in the Senate. Currently, California's 2 senators represent more than 37 million people, while Wyoming's represent fewer than 540,000 people. But in the House of Representatives, the framers provided for representation based on population. The great quandary was how to determine a state's population for allocating representation in Congress. If only free people were counted, then the northern states would have dominated the Congress. In 1790, Virginia, for example, had a total population of more than 690,000 people, but 288,000 of them were slaves. Thus, the state's free population was only about 404,000. On the other hand, Pennsylvania had a total population of 434,000, and all but 4,000 of these people were free. Pennsylvania was in the process of ending slavery, and by 1790, a majority of the state's black population was free, and those free blacks could vote on the same basis as free whites. Thus, if representation in Congress was based only on the free population, then Pennsylvania would be able to outvote Virginia. If slaves were counted in allocating representation, then Virginia would be the most powerful state in the nation, with the second largest congressional delegation. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Southerners at the convention insisted that their slaves, all of them, they insisted that their slaves be counted when allocating representation in Congress, even though everyone understood that slaves were considered property and had no political rights. Throughout the convention, the slave owners also made it clear that they did not expect an end to slavery in their states. Charles Pinckney of South Carolina, citing ancient Rome and Greece, declared that slavery was justified by the example of all the world. His cousin, General Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, told the convention that South Carolina and Georgia cannot do without slaves. The Southerners were adamant slaves were property. Southerners would continue to import more slaves from Africa, and at the same time, those slaves should be added to the number of free people when representation in Congress was being allocated. James Wilson of Pennsylvania, who eventually supported the clause, understood the inconsistencies of the Southern demands. He did not well see on what principle the admission of blacks in the proportion of 3/5 could be explained. He asked, if slaves were citizens, why are they not admitted on an equality with white citizens? But if slaves were admitted as property, it was reasonable to ask, then why is not other property admitted into the computation? I'm going to stop there. This is what they were debating. This guy is trying to expose the illogic of what they were saying. He's saying to them, you want to count all of these slaves as if they're citizens, because citizens are the only people who get representation in Congress. Property doesn't, right? And he says, and if we want to get real stupid about this, you could start adding your other property. He said, why not admit other property? Your horses, your dogs, your rakes, your hoes, your cows. You know, why not admit everything that's your property for representation? That's right. Right. So basically what wound up happening is, in order to keep the Union together, they allow for them to count 60%. Let's move the 3/5 thing out of the way and understand it as 60%. 60% of the enslaved population, because you see, based on the debate, the Southern states wanted to count every single slave as if he was a citizen of the United States, so that those states can get more representatives in the House of Representatives. That's what they wanted to do. So they said, no, we'll agree to allow you to count 60% of those people, not all of them, right? 60% of them. So they did that for the sake of trying to keep the Union intact. That's what happened. And so that just goes to show you that even when you go back to what Chancellor Kent was saying about slaves being citizens with disabilities, these people were in their own way playing around with this very same concept. They understood they didn't have civil and political rights the way whites did, particularly the enslaved ones. The black ones had. Go ahead.
Yeah, and let's frame it like this, right? Because they made it about black and white, but we showed earlier in the program how there were other blacks doing everything that every other citizen's doing at this. There were slaves being denied, right? Mm-hmm. So it's about free and enslaved. And to give you a kind of a modern day example, it's just like prisoners, right? Prisoners are still, you wouldn't look at any of your relatives that are in federal or state penitentiary and say they're not citizens, but they're citizens with disabilities. They can't vote. They can't do a lot of things that every other citizen can do. So their full citizenship has been arrested or has been handicapped in a way. So just because their access to citizenship is handicapped doesn't mean that they're not citizens. So we move backward in time. We have slaves, not prisoners, but they're being held captive, right? By slavery is another term for captivity. Prisoner is another term for captivity, right? So you're being held captive, right, in a certain way, but you're still a citizen based upon your allegiance in your lineage to the government, right? So we're those slaves. It's easy to understand it when you think about it. Like felons are citizens with disabilities. So were slaves. They were citizens with disabilities. That makes the whole argument even possible that Ali was just explaining. So it was a con being played. So the private bondage, right? The people who held these people in private bondage they knew that they were humans, right? All that other stuff was just rhetoric. So because they went to the federal government and said, I want to use my other people, humans, citizens that I'm holding captive.
You breaking up, bro. You break. Yeah, he done froze up.
Now let me say this, bro. Let me just say this: the ultimate proof of slave citizens can be found supported by the 13th Amendment, right? This is the ultimate proof that slavery and citizenship can coexist. Section 1 of the 13th Amendment tells you neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The fact of a person being convicted duly of a crime and then being sentenced and incarcerated does not deprive them of their citizenship. What it does is it disables them. But go ahead and finish what you were saying, Brother Logic. Is he on or is he still frozen?
I think he got.
Man, he frozen.
Let me say this before I go, because it's kind of storming where I'm at, and my internet's bad. And I know Avery's going to be in the chat. Every time I have Wi-Fi trouble, he's talking about me in the chat. So I'm getting off. I know my stuff is messing up.
You need to get off that satellite.
We just wanted to make that point. Yo, it's just bad weather right now. Don't worry. My Wi-Fi is actually pretty good. But, I got to go because I don't know how long I'm going to be able to be on here. Just remember, government is the game. Politics, how it's played. And you can't win unless you get in the game. I'm out. I know my brothers is going to take it home. I'm sorry I had to get out early, but you see I'm having trouble. But, I hope y'all enjoyed the program and the information, the way we framed it. And, continue to study, man. And we'll see you. I'll see y'all next time.
Peace, bro. Peace. I want to bring something up real quick. I want to touch on, because I know we're hitting at our 2-hour mark. Go ahead, Brother Josh.
I want to say, before we get off, were you going to move away from the 3/5 clause?
What I was going to do is go into one last thing about the Seamen's protection certificates, and I just wanted to show people.
Oh yeah, that's key.
But go ahead. What was you going to say?
Now I was going to say on the 3/5 clause. I was going to ask y'all, what do you think today's manifestation or use of the 3/5 clause is?
Prison gerrymandering.
Yep.
Bingo.
That's
exactly what it is.
Gerrymandering. Then you got the people that's on parole who have limited rights. People on parole, felons in general, in most states are citizens with disabilities. All of these things are unconstitutional. The United States of America's Constitution doesn't give the power to limit or restrict a person's citizenship due to the fact that he or she may have committed a crime. There's nothing in the Constitution that can be construed. Well, no, I can't say that. The 13th Amendment. I got to take that back. The 13th Amendment can be construed, but we see that in many cases is being misinterpreted. And that documentary, the 13th, gives us a real breakdown of how this loophole continues what Dr. Cornel West calls neo-slavery with America's prison industrial complex. And these people are still being counted in several states. Actually, there's a fight going on to stop having prisoners counted in the county where they're locked up at, because these counties are Republican-owned counties. So what some states are fighting for now is to have these prisoners counted census-wise back in their home states, so that it could level the playing field. Because if you think about it, the 3/5 clause leveled the playing field for the Southerners. As was stated earlier, the Northerners would have had a considerable power in Congress. There are several fights being played out right now. The fight to make Puerto Rico and is it Hawaii? I want to say states like New York and the rest of the 50 states, which would give the liberals 2 more seats in the House. So there's a lot of fights being played out right now. And I hope I answered your question, John, but I just wanted to add some more of, some more context to a lot of these fights, because a lot of this stuff is unconstitutional.
Oh yeah, and you spoke directly to it. See how we vibe, y'all? Like, we ain't discussed this beforehand. Building, and we could just read in each other's mind. We just flow with this stuff, man. Look, I'll be trying to find stuff y'all ain't read yet and surprise y'all once we get on. I know we all be doing that though. yeah. It says New Jersey takes on vestige of 3/5 clause, prison gerrymandering. I'm just gonna tap it a little bit. Every Monday, new inmates come in their process, says a white corrections officer early in the documentary, The Farm. We're all guaranteed a job, she adds, looking at the camera with the smirk. We have good job security, she nods as the camera pans back to 2 rows of shackled men, nearly all of them black, arriving at Angola Prison, formerly known as Louisiana State Penitentiary, to begin their sentences, most of them for life. Angola is the notorious maximum security prison, which, when it was a slave plantation, was named for the country in Africa where many of the slaves were captured. The clear implication is that things haven't changed all too much since 1865. White people are still exploiting black bodies, squeezing every dollar they can from them. And then it goes into this some more stuff. It's talking about prison gerrymandering. Incarceration and prison gerrymandering. So it's a policy that has become out of date since it was implemented for the 1790 census. What has changed is just the massive scale of incarceration in the U.S. What worked for the country in 1790 just doesn't work anymore in terms of data methodology. Alex, you see what that name is, legal director of the Prison Policy Initiative, told NPR. Even up until the 1970s, check this out. Even up until the 1970s, the incarcerated population was low enough that it did not impact redistricting when people were counted in the wrong place. So, they couldn't really use incarceration as a way to gerrymander, to affect the district, the redistricting. So it says, let me try this word, because y'all clowned me last time when I messed and I butchered the name. So Kajura, okay? Noted that many prisoners are released or moved to another facility after they accounted for the census, so that the facility that they happen to be incarcerated on census day is in no way reflective of the reality of where they actually even live and sleep most of the time, even by the Census Bureau's own guidelines. What prison gerrymandering does is further empower rural white communities while taking power from diverse urban ones. The comparison of the infamous 3/5 clause of the Constitution is obvious. During slavery, southern states bolstered their census numbers and consequently their representation in Congress using the 3/5 clause, which allowed them to count disenfranchised slaves as 3/5 of a person each. This is what Ali just read. The 3/5 clause virtually ensured that slaves will be represented by pro-slavery reps in Congress, the way prison gerrymandering ensures that prisoners contribute to the representation of pro-carceral towns that profit from confinement. it is what one writer has called the 5/5 clause. I need to click that link. Study about Pennsylvania state legislative districts by Villanova University associate professors highlights the impact this process can have on the political voice of the incarcerated people's home community. NPR's Hansi Lowan reported last month. The study found a substantial likelihood that Philadelphia would gain an additional majority-minority district for Pennsylvania's state house if prisoners incarcerated in the state were counted as residents of their last known addresses. Instead, according to the study's authors, Brianna Remster and Roy A. Kramer, the incarcerated are not only missing from their communities, they're also advantaging other communities. The votes of the people in the white rural prison communities simply have more power in those cities where many prisoners come from and will return. Did you see what this says?
Mm-hmm.
It said they found a substantial likelihood that Philadelphia would gain an additional majority-minority district. In other words, that's a whole district where there are people out and putting them to the rural white district and giving them more power, and we supposed to have this power in the district where our people living in. But because they're extracting so many. See, you got to go back up here where it says in the 1970s, the incarcerated populations was low enough that it did not impact. But today, they're flooding us into the prisons. They're flooding us into the prisons outside of the district, and that's costing this is straight crazy.
Like all of the main prisons are upstate New York. All of the main prisons are upstate New York. As you're reading that, so this prison industrial complex is not just, to create license plates and belts and things that we fans and fisheries and to have made in America signs. It also is rooted in this idea of the 3/5 clause. That is just absolutely amazing.
So you're used. Now they talk about the 5. They've renamed it the 5/5 clause. So you're used. Your vote is taken when you're incarcerated. It's taken from that district. So it's taken from where you would normally be living and put in somewhere you would not be living, giving your political enemy usually power, right? And then once you return back to where you live, and once you're released, if you caught that felony, your power is gone for good in most states. You've been disenfranchised. Right. So Joe Biden, that's a day one policy that we could be looking for. I don't know if that's going to have to be a Supreme Court thing or not, but that's a day one.
Now look, how is it that I get to be represented in these rural usually Republican-owned counties, and even though as I'm a prisoner, I can't cast my ballot. I don't think that these fights are being properly taken up. People are not. Where's the Congressional Black Caucus? Should have been on this years and years ago. This is the need of BTP, of a ADOS movement, right? And the many different content creators that are connected to America's descendants of slavery. This is the need for it, so we can start putting these ideas into the political atmosphere, so that any given time when one of us chooses to run for office, we can start plucking this stuff from out of the sky and loading it up in our proverbial magazine and go up in the house and start, I don't know if I want to use the term shooting stuff up, but proverbially, right? And what we have to start looking at these measures. We represent the largest prison population in the United States of America. Not only can we not vote from prison. In many states, we're felons that can't vote. And in the states where you can vote if you're a felon, you have to finish your time, which means if you had 15 years in prison and you came home in 7 and you still have 8 years left, then you can't vote until you finish parole. All of these things have to be challenged, and it's going to take a real push by real African American voters. You want to use the term black? Some people still like the term Negro. I don't know why, but that's their choice. And but we're going to really need a push in that direction. We're going to have to reframe the way we look at politics. We have to reframe it. And it takes this type of education, and it's going to take advocacy once this COVID-19 thing is over, because I know I'm setting up the run, and my bros and we discuss this often.
Yeah. There's 3 things I want to show real quick, and then I'm off it. All right, this is from a book called Passport in America. Right? The history of the passport in America. Black sailors received a Seaman's Protection Certificate. Some people might remember us going over this before. Black sailors received a Seaman's Protection Certificate that stated the bearer was a citizen of the United States of America. Introduced at the end of the 18th century, these documents were regularly used until 1940. It's estimated that many thousands of them were issued to free black sailors from 1796 to 1868. As a runaway slave, Frederick Douglass escaped disguised as a sailor and carried a borrowed Seaman's Protection Certificate to prove that he was a freed slave. Right. So let me get off of that. Now I want to show people what one of these documents looked like. Right. You can Google Seaman's Protection Certificate, people, if you're interested. I'm going to show one of them, so that you can get an idea what it looked like. Okay, right here, what you see is Seaman's Protection Certificate, number 43802, District and Port of Philadelphia. It says, I, Charles Brown, collector of the District of Philadelphia, do hereby certify that Samuel, I don't know what his last name is, let me see. It says Samuel Fox, okay. Samuel Fox, an American seaman, 20 years or thereabouts, of the heights of 5 feet 3 inches, light African complexion, black woolly hair, brown eyes, a scar near the left wrist, a native of the city of Philadelphia, state of Pennsylvania, has this day produced to me proof in the manner directed in the act entitled, you guys should look this act up, an act for the relief and protection of American seamen, and something to an act. I do hereby certify that Samuel Fox is a citizen of the United States of America. The bottom part is hard to read here. I guess, and pursuant to the act, pursuant to the whatever act or whatever, I do hereby certify that Samuel Fox is a citizen of the United States of America. Some of this stuff is hard to read because it's like old and whatever. But in any case, this is what one of them looked like. And this one was issued in 1854, 2 years before the Dred Scott case that says blacks could not be citizens of the United States. They would gain, this goes back. So I'm going to show you another thing, and then I'm off of it, right? One more thing. Let me see. Where is this thing at? Right here. Okay, hold on. This was this is a database showing how many of these people had these things, right? Let me know if you guys can see this.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna pull it up. So let's just reiterate real quick, family. The purpose of tonight's show, or broadcast rather, was to show that we've been citizens in this country since day one. We've been citizens in this country since day one. Say that again, brother.
Say day one.
Day one. We the true day ones up in this piece. In fact, we got more lineage here than Southerners who seceded, because we've been continual citizens, while Southerners had a period when they weren't. And the only thing that could bring them back in the Union was the 14th Amendment. And I'm going to get into that before we close out.
That's a fact. So what we see here, and I'm gonna have to make it a little bit smaller, but I just want you to see, this is the registers of Seamen's Protection Certificates, right? And it gives you the names of the individuals, last name, first name, and so forth. So you got a guy named Elias Zaris, Samuel Zaris, 25, 20, 29, Elias Zarkis was 20, William Zarkis, right? So there's a whole list of these individuals. Let me go down slower. You even had
and these are our ancestors, family. This is before the passage of the 14th Amendment.
Oh yeah, these are all quote unquote Negroes, all of them, right? And I'm gonna scroll over so you guys can see that, right? Because see at the top right here, it says last name, first name, age, birthplace, state. A lot of these were from Massachusetts, Rhode Island. You see going down. All of these are brothers. Believe me, I'm gonna show you. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Virginia, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Connecticut, right? And so I'm gonna scroll over so you can see their complexion. Hold on, let me go in, let's go into this. Hold on a second. All right, so they describe these people as Negro complexion. See, I just look at this complexion, Negro, and then the dates that they were given: 1809. This brother was done in 1809. This one was 1799. He was issued this certificate. This one's 1800, 1805 here, 1811, 1815. These are all Negroes with these certificates declaring them citizens of the United States. 1797, 1797, another one. This guy, these people from New London. 1805, you can see all of the dates. Early in the history of America under the Constitution. 1798, 1801. All is Negroes. They have their complexion as Negro. That's how they list them. 1799, 1797 up here, 1800, 1801, 1799. Let me show you all these people's names. Thomas Warren, Cato Waterman, Peter Watson, Charles Waite. He may be related to you.
Right, word.
Let's see Charles Waite.
That's my last name right there.
Charles Waite was 18. His birthplace was Hadley, Massachusetts. The district was New London. They don't have his date though. That's crazy. But they have him as a Negro. His certificate was 6230. His date is missing. That's crazy.
I'm trying to have my history internet.
right. So look, you got William Thompson, Henry Thompson, Eliakim Toby, Charles Tossett, Ira Topit. Right, all these are Negroes who were being issued these Seaman Protection Certificates early on underneath the Constitution. So I just wanted to show you that and this list goes on. Like this is a long list of people.
All citizens before the passage of the 14th Amendment. And that segues into my next what I'm about to pull up. And I wanted to pull this comment up. It's not to brag or gloat or anything, but I think this is a brother Axe at Be the Power. I don't know how you guys know how to find this information, We've heard that a time or two. We've heard that a time or two before, but we've been doing this for a minute, and I gotta give props and honors to Prophet Noble Drew Ali, because he's the one that got us into this study. He's the one that got us looking outside of the slavery narrative and into the fact that we've been citizens from day one. And I want to read something real quick. And he goes into the 14th and 15th Amendment, and then I'm going to read something from the slaughterhouse cases. So Prophet Noble Drew Ali says, the word Negro deludes in the Latin language to the word nigger. The same as the word colored deludes to anything that is painted, varnished, and dyed. So Noble Drew Ali urged the Moors to disavow these names, because these are not the names of human beings. These are the names of that a wicked people chose to put on human beings so that they could perpetually control, subjugate, and dominate them. He says, and every nation must bear a national descent name of their forefathers, because honoring thy fathers and thy mothers, your days will be lengthened upon this earth. These names have never been recognized by any true American citizen of this day. Now you got to remember, he's talking in the 1920s. He continues, through your free national name, you are known and recognized by all nations of the earth that are recognized by said national government in which they live. The 14th and 15th Amendments brought the North and South in unit, placing the Southerners, who were at that time without power, within the constitutional body of power. And at that time, 1865, the free national constitutional law that was enforced since 1774 declared all men equal and free. And if all men are declared by the free national constitution to be free and equal, since the constitution has never been changed, there is no need for the application of the 14th and 15th Amendments for the salvation of our people and citizens. Now, that is number one, is some history there insofar as the 14th and 15th Amendments the Southerners who seceded had to sign these documents in order for them to be brought back into the Union. This is how they got back into the Union. The history retells, it revises our citizenship here by saying through the 14th Amendment, we become citizens of the United States of America. And this just simply is not the truth. So what I want to do is I want to go to this article. It's from this book on, let me see, let me get the name of the book. Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Sumner and Monroe Elementary Schools, Management, Alternative Study and Environmental Assessments, 1992. And it reads, let me make sure that that's up on the screen. Let's get into this real quick. The obstacle continues. The slaughterhouse cases in 1873 presented the Supreme Court with its first opportunity to review and interpret the 14th Amendment. These cases involved butchers who were excluded by a monopoly granted by the Louisiana legislature to a New Orleans slaughterhouse, and who therefore claimed that the legislator had denied them property rights guaranteed under the 14th Amendment. The court, in an exceedingly narrow interpretation of the 14th Amendment, held that the butchers were not denied the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, since this amendment protected only federal rights, such as travel upon the high seas, governmental protection in foreign countries, and the availability of the writ of habeas corpus. Most rights flowed from state citizenship, including the property rights of the butchers, and were not protected by the 14th Amendment. Thus, as a practical matter, The definition and protection of the rights of citizens were left to the states. The implications of the slaughterhouse cases for blacks were ominous. Local authorities soon saw that this principle could be used to establish jurisdiction over the lives of black citizens and make the 14th Amendment impotent as an instrument for their protection. This was precisely what happened once radical Republican politicians were driven from office in the South. Black citizens were deprived of their basic civil rights. So when Noble Drew Ali said that the 14th and 15th Amendments were not necessary for our salvation, my interpretation of it was based on an agreement with pretty much what I just read here, when it says the implications of the slaughterhouse cases for blacks were ominous, and ominous indeed they were, because it says that the black citizens in the South, after the radical Republicans, which are today's Democrats, and I guess today's radical Democrats would be the more progressive wing of that party, as opposed to your Pelosi, Obama corporate types of that party. These people were run out of office, and our people were denied their rights once the Southerners got readmitted back into the Union. So to RL's question of, like how y'all know all of this stuff, it starts with the foundation of a man that I follow. I'm not going to speak for all of my brothers on this panel, but I follow this man who puts me right here, right now, and gives me the opportunity, gives us, because many of us came through this same school, the opportunity to pull this information from these early records to show that we were, in fact, day one citizens of the United States of America. So I just wanted to run through that real quick before we got up off here. Brother Josh or Ali, did y'all want to add anything to that before we get out?
I just was responding to a comment in the chat. Somebody named American Lady says we also have to remember that poor white men, i.e. white men who didn't own land, weren't allowed to vote until the 1820s or 30s.
Yeah, but what that does, and I'm glad she said that, the fact that women couldn't vote or hold office, the fact that children couldn't vote or hold office even to this day, that none of that undermines their citizenship. So to the point of clarifying black people's citizenship, understand that it's not dependent upon the right to vote or the right to hold office. It had everything to do with allegiance. And so women, white women, children, enslaved people, none of those people could hold office or vote. Yet their allegiance was to the United States. And that's all I want to say. So I don't know what point she was trying to make, but it
looked like an all lives matter point.
What I would say, that ain't stopped them from owning. They still had the right to own themselves. They still had the right to own. They just had to get up. Hey, you got to get your status up. You still had the right to own me. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So, like, I don't. If that's some type of like, well, what about us? Nah, I don't know if that's the point she was making or not, but that's what came to mind. What about us? Like, look, we're talking. Don't try to do that type of comparison stuff. That stuff that's real insensitive. That's real disrespectful. We have a conversation.
They don't care. Most of them people, they've been like that since the 1800s. It is a part of the American civil religion, So let me see. This person comes up again. Let's put it up on the screen. Poor white men were considered citizens as well as white women, even though they weren't allowed to vote. Some think we weren't citizens because we weren't allowed to until the 15th Amendment. I don't understand. We're not talking about any of that. But if anybody wanted to add anything before we closed out?
Well, I would just say that I hope our family got something out of the presentation. I was trying to go through it as fast as possible, and I guess at times I was reading fast, but hopefully you were able to pick up some of the sources, and then you guys can go back and read through some of that stuff yourselves, and just if you're not familiar with it, maybe familiarize yourselves with it. But the whole purpose of doing this was just to show that the United States, in contradiction to the principles embedded in the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, where they said governments are instituted to protect the rights of the people, that we were considered part of the people. We were considered a part of that body of politics, the people who created this thing called the United States. One of the greatest examples of patriotism can be seen in Crispus Attucks, moving all the way up through every single war that was fought for this country, like Brother Logic is pointed out in different occasions. And so I just think that it just goes to undergird further the fact that this government did not do right by us. And as it pertains to our justice claim, from the time of 1776, they had every opportunity to do right by us, and they chose not to. That's all I wanted to say.
Indeed, Brother Josh.
Hey, look, we piling it on. Like we got so much to bring as far as this justice claim. Like we can pile the papers and the damages all the way up to the ceiling, and still have more to go. We can fill up a whole room of papers to talk about the damages. We can fill up a whole room just with our ancestral names and all of our people that were just done extremely dirty for the longest. So what we're doing, we just wanted to bring another. As reparationists, we're fighting all kind of fights out here. It's people that's coming and saying all kind of crazy stuff. And we wanted to make sure we're arming our fellow reparationists out here with all the tools and all the knowledge. Like, sometimes when you're fighting, you can't just use a sword. You can't just use a gun or something. You might have to use a plastic explosives or something. You might have to use some poison. You might have to use a slingshot. You know what I'm saying? We're giving you all the tools that's needed for all of these arguments to just slice up, dice up, blow up, poison, whatever you need to do in this fight for reparations. So this right here, man, it was powerful. It was powerful. I just want to say, I am a reparationist.
And I'm gonna say this. A lot of my motivation for wanting to do it too was the fact that the professor from Howard had made the argument that we're not going to get reparations.
Just to be clear, talking about Dale Scott. Okay.
He made the argument that we're not going to get reparations, unlike the Japanese Americans, because we were not citizens. The Japanese Americans were citizens who were done dirty by this government, but blacks were not citizens, and so therefore you have no standing. And so I was like, that's not true, dude. I can show you how wrong you are on so many levels with regard to that, the history of black citizenship. And so that's really what this whole thing was born out of, my debate with him over black citizenship and even whether or not the slaves were citizens. So that I just wanted to say that.
Now you talking about this guy who he's a professor at Howard University. Is he a white professor? Is he a white supremacist professor at Howard University?
I think
is he a white supremacist professor? I'm just wondering, because how you're describing him, that's kind of like the type of argument that I would expect to hear from that type of person.
From a white supremacist. I think I've told him that he was a white supremacist in the past. I'm pretty sure I have.
Come on, man.
I told him he's a white supremacist and that he lacked imagination.
And imagine, family. You pay. Me and Logic, we was looking up the tuition for Howard University, and imagine you pay all, you work your whole life and you or whatever, and you done saved up and you making some type of contribution to send your babies to Howard University. So you thinking that you're gonna get an HBCU education, teaching your people to be empowered, you know, to be instilled with some of the stuff. And you got professors over there that look like you that's teaching white supremacist ideology. That's interesting. That's interesting. And you know, I'm not trying to put it all on them. I'm just, all I can speak from is what we're seeing. It's a constant pattern. It's very disturbing. So when we fight down here. We're not just fighting the white supremacists that y'all might have seen on our BTP short clip on that Facebook, on our BTP Be the Power Facebook page. We made the video with the Nas, New York song. What song was it? My bad, my mind is messed up. But you know what I'm talking about. We made
New York.
the Power page when we first showed you where the genesis of the word reparation is. And you go look at the comments in there, you see just the most vile, nasty white supremacists in them comments. We battling them, but we also battling the black white supremacists too, which is real crazy.
My bad. My cat is messing with me.
Yeah, take us out.
Yeah, you can take us out, bro. We went over. I was trying to keep it under 2 hours, man.
We was trying. These conversations start flowing. I mean, it was a good. I basically was just trying to jump in where I could. I know that you and Brother Logic were passionate about this topic over the past couple of days. So, as the discussion progressed, then I was able to kind of jump in with where I wanted to add on, and that's why I opened up this particular broadcast tonight the way that I did, reading from the definition of nationality and that specific part about owing allegiance, and the fact that we in America pre-1776 had substantial land holdings for our people, but due to systemic racism and the fact that we weren't seen as Christians, these things were stripped from us. And this becomes a core of how America, although it's not embedded within its constitution, it navigates how it's going to deal with the people who were enslaved in the United States of America. Even those whom are free are severely limited. But it never, ever showed that or proved, and this was brought up by Ali and myself with the dissent to the case of Dred Scott, that we were not citizens. We've always been citizens in this country. And I think that, and this is our opinion, that as we make the case for reparations, it has to be grounded in an understanding that American slavery is a unique thing among this phenomenon of slavery, this institution that goes back thousands and thousands of years. And couple that with the fact that America took its citizens and enslaved them. If we were to be free and equal with the adoption of the Constitution as all men were, then we should have been. We should have been made free and equal. America chose to ignore the things that it put on paper. George Washington, the hero of the United States, and many of its heroes, Jackson, you can name them. They were all slave owners, all slave holders. So there's a hypocrisy there with what the country is supposed to be dedicated to and what the founders are actually practicing. In this, we, as the sons and daughters of the freedmen, America's descendants of slavery, are the only true citizens in the United States of America. This is my opinion here. And we've always been the only true citizens in the United States of America, because we never had the power to subvert the laws of the United States of America. We got punished for every petty crime. Whereas the European American, or whom you call white people, and we're watching this play out in front of our eyes with the Trump presidency and his cronies subvert the laws of the United States of America. We had to abide by those laws. We had to be strict constitutionalists. We were what the founders of this country envisioned and embodied in what is the Republic of the United States of America. And no other people, none, since the inception of this country have been citizens that adhered to the foundational documents of this country, like those called Black, Negroes, African Americans, etc. today. So I wanted to end with that, because I need us as reparationists to move forward with that sentiment on our back. That's something that we need to carry on our backs like a backpack, that not only have we been citizens from day one, but we embody the citizenship of the United States of America, because we can never be subversive to it, and only they have been. I'll leave you with the message and the motto of our platform, which is don't just fight the power, become the power, and then and only then will you have the power to make a change. And with that, I say peace.